Hello and welcome. UVA Speaks is a podcast of Lifetime Learning, a division of the Office of Engagement at the University of Virginia. Lifetime Learning brings the knowledge and expertise of UVA's faculty to university's alumni, friends, and families. My name is Susan Lynch, and I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. This podcast features Kody Grant. He is the Tribal Liaison in the University of Virginia's Division for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Mr. Grant is a member of the Pueblo of Isleta and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian tribes. Before coming to UVA, he supervised the American Indian Initiative at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. He helped spearhead full-time American Indian programming throughout the museum, facilitated interpretation and training for historical and modern Indigenous perspectives for guests and coworkers, and reestablished outreach efforts for the organization. In this podcast, Mr. Grant will discuss his position as the University of Virginia's Tribal Liaison. So thank you, Mr. Grant, for speaking with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Great. So first, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, sort of your background and the kind of work you did before coming to UVA?
Sure. So I got really interested in studying more about history and kind of my culture and where I came from, I guess in my late teen years. So before that, I wasn't really kind of interested in learning these different things, but I ended up getting connected with a number of friends after moving back to Cherokee in North Carolina, who were getting started with a program called the Warriors of Onondaga. And they were effectively put in through tribal council as being the cultural ambassadors for the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. And so in getting to work with them, working through our outdoor museum, which was the Oconaluftee Indian Village, also working as an actor at the Unto These Hills Outdoor Drama, I had a really kind of neat, immersive experience of learning more about where my community comes from. And through that work, I ended up getting connected with a number of other different institutions and museums for doing cultural programs and work. And that's actually what ended up bringing me to Virginia. And so I worked, as you mentioned, at Colonial Williamsburg, and I've also done contract work for a number of other museums in Virginia. And then I ended up moving to Virginia, I'd say about 9 years ago now, to eventually take a full-time position down there. And it was a neat kind of job. Like I really enjoyed being in that space and in that environment and meeting with guests who were interested to hear different kind of stories and perspectives. And I wouldn't say they were always prepared for that, but they were always open to it, right? Mm-hmm. And so being able to kind of look at early American history and relationships of tribal communities as the colonial or the colony of Virginia, I guess you'd say, and how that evolves over time through the Revolution and up into the modern day, I realized that there was a lack of understanding with guests in modern Indigenous communities. And so it was very much the where were they, what were they doing, who were they, what did they think, what did they eat? And it was always in the past tense. And so I started realizing that it would be easier to take what guests currently knew of, right? However, based on stereotypes or their understanding from their education in early American relations, to use whatever it was that they knew already and then build off of that. And so it was neat to kind of meet guests at their varying different perspectives. So we had folks who had only seen Pocahontas, right? So we can build off of that, absolutely. And then we had folks who went through university, got their degree in history and sometimes specifically with American Indian studies. And so already had kind of a wealth of knowledge and interest, and were interested in seeing how that connected with the stories that I was sharing. And so it was always neat to kind of bring these different folks together and find that level of understanding as to how modern relationships stand between the United States, the federally recognized tribal communities, and then here in Virginia, for example, some of our state recognized communities. And so I was always kind of on stage, right? Saying, we're going to talk about this. And I got interested in seeing if we could find the perspective of saying, as opposed to me telling you about the history of Pamunkey people in Virginia, can I find you a Pamunkey citizen to speak with, to hear their perspective, instead of me talking about Monacan folks in the Piedmont region? Can I find you a Monacan citizen to share their story? And so I was really interested in finding that kind of background actor work, right? Is mapping different resources and community members and connecting them with the folks who are interested in hearing those stories. And so the tribal liaison, coincidentally enough, popped up when I was at that crossroads, I guess you'd say. And so I went and applied, and fortunately enough, they were open to bringing me on board. And so now I work for UVA as the inaugural tribal liaison. And it really kind of fits what I was looking to do is, can I find you citizens from these communities to speak and work with, as opposed to just me telling you about their histories. And I think that does a lot to make that connection of saying, not here's where they were, who they were, here's where they're at now, here's who they are. You can meet them, you can speak with them, you can have a conversation.
Great. So you were already building bridges between communities. So yeah, that sounds like it fits very much so. So thank you so much for that background and context. It's as you mentioned, this is a new position as of last year at the university. So can you tell us about the position itself? You spoke about it a little bit more, but if you could talk a little bit more about the position itself and which office you're situated within.
Sure. So it's very much like you said, right? It's bridge building. So with a lot of institutions, kind of similar to museums, right? In Virginia, it has been kind of a long road to uh, recognizing the station and place of tribal nations within Virginia. And a lot of that has to do with things like the Racial Integrity Act from 1924 that has really kind of hindered that work. And so, in a lot of ways, we are just playing catch up with what relationships should look like between institutions and tribal nations. And it's I will say it's a very exciting time because folks are taking another look to see what kind of work we can do as a higher education institution and serving a portion of our community members here in Virginia. And so in Virginia today, for example, we have 11 tribal nations. 7 of them are federally recognized, so they have a certain relationship with the United States government on a government to government level. And then we still have 4 state recognized tribes in Virginia that are basically um, acknowledged by the Commonwealth of Virginia as being a tribal community. And so that brings a certain level of partnership that's a little bit different than just working with a community organization or a community group, right? And so, how do we rethink nation building? Is effectively what we're doing. Is we're partnering with these different nations to see how we can be of service to the needs of that nation or that tribal government. And because of that difference, a lot of folks have been really interested in partnering or working with these tribal governments. It's just they never knew who to contact or who to reach out to. And so the tribal liaison role, as you mentioned before, was built out of consultation with the tribal communities, specifically to answer that question, right? Of who do we find out who to work with? When is it appropriate to work with them? And what are the differences? So when you're working with tribal governments, kind of like institutions, right? Everybody has their own kind of protocols or the way that they do things or view or look at themselves. And that creates different timelines, different expectations. It's very similar with tribal governments. They have their own needs and wants and concerns, and that creates different motivations and timelines for them. So it's very fun trying to manage these different expectations to find that balance of saying, here's where we're all interested in these things. Here's where we connect on these number of items. And that's where we can find our good position of collaboration. And so with that bridge building, we're just kind of laying those planks down one at a time until we're eventually able to come together and meet one another on equal footing. So it's a very neat and inaugural position.
Mhm.
But luckily, uh, like UVA, a number of other institutions throughout Virginia are interested in very much the same work. And so there's this neat kind of network that's being built throughout the Commonwealth to basically say, how can we, not just as our individual institutions, but also collectively serve the needs of tribal nations as well?
Great. I was wondering about that, if there were other universities across the Commonwealth that are doing this work. So it's good to hear that other universities are also working on this. And this is also within the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, that are certainly doing a lot of work across the university and the Commonwealth as well. I've been very impressed by the work that the university is doing around the enslaved communities, and so this is an important extension as well. So, as a new position, can you tell us about sort of the goals of the position in general and some of your short-term goals?
Sure. So a lot of it has been resource mapping. So for this first year, I've made it a really big point to get out into the community to meet with folks face to face, right? To shake hands, to say hello, and to let them know that the position is open at UVA. And so if anybody needs anything or they're interested in reaching out or learning about a program, they have somebody that they can call, somebody that they can email to say, here's what I'm interested in. And I found how'd you put it, a lot of my most meaningful kind of contacts have been at times when I went to a program. So, for example, there's the Indigenous Perspectives exhibit over at the Library of Virginia, and they've hosted a number of in person talks basically surrounding the history and the current relationship of the nations here in Virginia. And I've just shown up to go and learn, to see what folks are interested in, what they're talking about. And I've usually ended up having about 4 or 5 conversations just standing there saying hello. And somebody's saying, oh, we were talking about this. And then I had met somebody at UVA who had a conversation with something similar. So I said, well, I tell you what, when we get back to law, I'll put you in touch with so and so, and then let's see what y'all can put together. And so it's also been not just that they know the tribal liaison at UVA, but I'd love for folks to know the different professionals and faculty and staff and students at UVA that are interested and invested in working with tribal nations. And so it's one of the greatest benefits, I'd say, of this role is it's not built in a silo, right? So, like you're saying, with Office for Diversity and Inclusion working across grounds, the tribal liaison is an extension of that. And so I've met with folks over at the law school. I met with folks over at the School of Architecture. And it's neat to see how all of these different levels of study connect in some way with the needs of tribal nations. And so it's been neat to see and make these different connections between folks who, in some instances, knew that they wanted to make that connection, and in other instances, didn't know that the connection was there. Right. And so I guess my main roles of serving as a liaison is just liaising between people and, also providing support whenever they need it. So I think one of the biggest factors too is one is the outreach to the communities, but I think at another end is in UVA, I'm meeting with different folks, is also bringing a lot of the words of the tribal citizens that I've heard from them of saying, here's what we've been looking for, or here's what we've been interested, and then also bringing that to UVA. So I regularly meet with different staff and faculty based on what they're interested in doing, or just kind of learning more. They say, we want to know what the tribes are interested in. And so this also provides that segue of bringing the knowledge of the communities to UVA to say, here's what I've heard, and here's what they're thinking about. And if there is something that we can find that connects there, we'd be happy to make that connection. But ultimately, I would say in the long term, all of that, I hope, leads towards building a very welcoming environment here at UVA for any of the tribal nations and citizens who might wish to call UVA their professional or academic home. So hopefully there's something here that they find for them because we've been in community with them, right? They know UVA. UVA comes to community events. UVA comes to programs and learns a bit more about what they're doing today. And so I'm hoping to continue building out that network that we're not so much as strangers as we used to be.
Yeah, I mean, we can be better neighbors and better citizens along with the tribes if we have that feedback loop. And it sounds, it's wonderful that this position is available to provide that in a structured way. I think it's really valuable and important. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. And finally, you've spoken a little bit about it, but looking into the future, what are your hopes for this position, and what can this kind of position bring to the university?
I hope it would continue to grow, right? So with the tribal liaison and kind of finding those connection points, there's a lot of things that I would say I don't know, right? And I think I enjoy being very forward about saying, I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And so I would hope that as we continue to move forward, right, as the years go by, we find opportunities to find more roles and positions that serve the needs of tribal nations, to what they need or to what they're looking for. And so I would hope that we can continue to build on that partnership by, as you mentioned with liaison, right, putting in an investment into those partnerships and finding more opportunity for um, hiring in more folks and more staff that can focus on that. So on one end, it's you kind of putting your money where your mouth is what this role is. And so the tribal liaison role is purely dedicated to that bridge building aspect and that focus. And I know there's a lot of other departments that would definitely benefit from having somebody with their level of expertise focused on that same level of work. And so um, for me, I think as we move forward, it's exciting to say that this is not the end all be all, right? The tribal liaison isn't here to be uh, the main focus and the end point, but that it's the beginning. It's a starting point of building out further connections.
I'm sure it'll be helpful for students as well, Indigenous students to have someone, to connect with.
Mhm.
Is that part of the work as well?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to provide any support that I can for our Indigenous students who are here. And the connection point for all students, I think, is also
Yeah.
something that I think a lot of folks miss as well. So I've had the opportunity to join in with some of the student resource fairs that are going on, and it's interesting to realize that not a lot of students will look at working for a tribal government as an option for career. When funny enough, a lot of the programs they offer at UVA, right, again, tribal nations are modern communities and nations with modern infrastructure, and they need the skills and expertise of students coming out of these programs. And so I've had a great time meeting with students and parents and saying, we need cybersecurity folks, we need architects, right? We need all these different professions. And folks just never considered that working for a tribal government was an option. And so I was letting folks know that I'm happy to work with them and to see if there's a connection of where they might want to go, maybe locally, right? Working with some of the Virginia tribes. But there are also nationally, there's 574 federally recognized governments that have their own infrastructure and needs. And so there's an opportunity for traveling right across the United States to do work with these different nations. And so it's been neat to let folks know that yes, I'm here to serve all of our students in how that connects with working with tribal nations and tribal governments. And so it's been very exciting because I've seen some lights go off in folks' head and saying, "Oh, you mean I could probably if I'm interested in law, I could possibly go work as a lawyer for a tribal government?" I said, "Absolutely. It's a different kind of study of law, but you got it. You can. It's
Mhm.
a possibility." And the tribes are absolutely looking for folks to come in and work with them. And so it's been neat to be able to let folks know that that's an opportunity for them.
That's great. Yeah, that's a wonderful opening of ideas for folks and what they can do next. And I would think too that for those students that are prospective students to see that the university has a position like this, and hopefully that more Indigenous and American Indian students, prospective students, would see the university as an open and welcoming place. So it's
Hmm.
awesome to have
Absolutely.
you in that type of position for that.
Hmm.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing this information about your important position with us, and I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with UVA's alumni, friends, and families. I'm sure people will be very interested in learning about your position and what it brings to the university. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I'm always happy to meet and talk with folks. So if anybody is ever interested in reaching out, you can send me an email at triballiaison@virginia.edu. I worked with my supervisor to launch our tribal relations webpage now that is active. So it's on the DEI site as tribal liaison or tribal relations. So you can check out that page. And if any folks are interested in maybe getting out into the community, checking out a powwow, for example, I've met a lot of folks who didn't know that the powwows are open for the public to go and attend. And so we're keeping that webpage updated with different events and programs that are happening locally. So if anyone's interested in just getting out there and seeing what the tribes are up to, right, find out where you can connect and what you can check out.
Wonderful. Well, I'll include that in the show notes, as they say. So, thank you so much. That's wonderful, and I'll check that out myself. So,
Please
thank you
do.
so much again. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been
Okay,
fun.
great. And thank you to everybody for listening. For upcoming podcasts and other lifetime learning programming, recordings, and blogs, please visit our website at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. You can also find our podcasts on the Virginia Audio Collective, which is a network of UVA podcasts hosted by WTJU Radio and can be found at virginiaaudio.org. So thanks again, and we look forward to you taking part in future lifetime learning programs.